Well, welcome back to Beattie and Reith every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, and we love your company. Thank you for being with us. Well, tonight we're talking to leaders of the future, and our next guest is Senator James Paterson, who is the youngest Liberal to ever enter the Senate, and he's a senator from Victoria. So, James, thank you for joining us.
Good to see you, James, and congratulations.
Thank you, Peter.
Congratulations.
And Peter, great to be with you.
You were just elected only a few weeks ago, and how's
About 7 weeks into the job.
Yeah, and I can tell the listeners that you're 28, you're the youngest in the Senate, and you've had a lot of experience already in politics, and most importantly in public policy. You've worked in the Institute for Public Affairs in Melbourne, which is a pretty good place to start. And you gave a pretty interesting speech in your maiden effort. But I want to start with this. We've been talking with the Labor Party, Jim Chambers, and he reckons that we don't have a problem. Well, he doesn't have a problem with the black hole. So I was just wondering whether or not you've seen a black hole in the last few days wandering around the Senate. Well, and where do you reckon it's at now, that issue? What's happening to it?
Jim's clearly doing a sterling effort cleaning up after his Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, and protecting him, who described this $19.5 billion black hole in their costings as a rounding error. If that's what the Labor Party thinks a rounding error is, I would hate to see what a real costings problem is.
Oh, was he the one who made that comment, was he? Was that came from Jim?
The Shadow Treasurer was, yes.
Yeah, right. Okay.
No, the Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, said that.
Oh, right, he said it himself, yeah. Sorry, keep going, yeah, great. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I feel sorry for the Labor Party on one level. They thought they were being bold and innovative by putting out a tax policy right out before the election, but what they forgot to do was their homework. They forgot to do the detail, and the $37 billion that they claimed this would raise was in fact out in Treasury's estimation by $19.5 billion. Treasury are the best at business at estimating these sorts of things, and if their view is there's a $19.5 billion black hole, I'm going to take their word for it.
Yeah, they should have done an update though too, shouldn't they? Was that one of the mistakes they made?
Well, I would encourage them to do so now.
James, let me come back to your maiden speech, which was quite an interesting one, I have to say. I notice you argue for the restoration of the debt ceiling, which, as you know, was abolished in 2013 by the then Liberal Treasurer. Tell me, I think viewers would like to know, could you just explain exactly how that would work and what difference it would have made, for example, to the budget that was delivered yesterday?
Well, for a start, I don't pretend that this would be a panacea. It wouldn't fix the debt and deficit problem facing Australia, which is very serious. Our net debt is now around about $400 billion, and it is forecast to peak at about $450 billion in a few years' time before it starts to come down. That means we have an interest bill payment every month of about $1 billion, $15 billion a year. That's an extraordinary burden, which my generation is going to have to pick up if this generation doesn't make some real headway towards dealing with it now. The virtue and the beauty of a debt ceiling is it requires the executive, the government of the day, to go to the parliament, seek approval to increase the debt ceiling. They have to get permission, they have to get approval, they have to make the case. Now, when we have had this in the past, the Parliament has tended to grant that approval, but at least the government of the day has had to justify why they need that approval, and it's come up for public scrutiny. I think that's really important. And I was very interested to see the other day on Sky News, Tony Abbott was being interviewed by Andrew Bolt, and he said, when asked to nominate his single biggest mistake as Prime Minister, he said, with retrospect, that it was abolishing the debt ceiling. So I think that's an encouraging development, and I hope it gains support.
Yeah, sorry, mate. So what would that have meant in terms of yesterday? There would have been the need for an additional bill, presumably, had the debt ceiling been lifted. So you'd had the budget, and then you would have a separate bill to lift it, assuming they had to lift the debt ceiling.
Well, yeah, it would entirely depend on where the initial debt limit was set, and if this budget was likely to breach that, then it would be incumbent on the government, as you say, to move a bill to raise that limit. And it'll be up to the government of the day to propose what that limit should be and how much it should be increased by, and then it'll be up to the Parliament to scrutinise that decision. I think the good thing about that is that it would bring the Greens and the crossbenchers and Labor, who have been unfortunately not very serious about tackling the debt and deficit problem that we have in Australia, into the process, and to make them accountable in a decision and to participate in a decision. It was the Greens who are very keen to abolish the debt ceiling, more keen than anyone, because they regard it as a real obstacle to their plan to grow government and to make government bigger in this country. That's not something that I think Liberals should ever sign up to.
One of the things I liked also in your maiden speech was a statement which was that if necessary you'd be prepared to cross the floor, and you wouldn't be the first to do that. Do it early in your political career would be my suggestion.
That's a bit of fatherly advice, James.
But,
Yeah, appreciate it.
But there are a lot of issues, and I mean one of the issues is, you know, what's your view about this, about the budget? Because, well, someone made the point, you know, it was 25.8, I think it was, the spending number, and over 4 years it's going to drop down to 25.2, which doesn't seem a hell of a lot. And if you read Judith Sloan, the well-known economist, she was pretty scathing that after 4 years, the best you could say is that the government spending had dropped by $1.7 billion, which is a drop in the bucket.
Feed in federal budget terms,
But give us your assessment of where that overall situation is going and how it's being handled.
Well, Peter, I should say first of all, I hope I never have to cross the floor. I hope I'm always able to persuade my colleagues, and I certainly won't be crossing the floor on the budget, so the headline up front there. Look, one of the things I was really pleased about with this budget is how, for a budget which is handed down probably only months out from election, how prudent and conservative it was. I mean, you've both been in politics for a long time. Think back about governments that you've seen and the budgets they've handed down before an election, and can you think of any that has declined to take the opportunity to spend freely in an effort to buy votes? Well, this government, our Treasurer and our Prime Minister has decided to take the prudent and sensible and cautious approach. There is no new net spending. That's an extraordinary thing. There are not many budgets that never have any new net spending, and there are no tax increases, so in net terms. So I'm really pleased about those two particular aspects.
James, can I ask you this question? And I admire the fact that young people go into politics, and I think at 28 you ought to be congratulated, and while we have political differences, I wish you well. Let me ask you this question. I know a young man who came into Parliament when I did, and I won't mention who he is because he's still in public life, and I thought in a sense he came in a bit younger than you, but stagnated in a way in terms of the policy development. Really nice person. How do you maintain, how do you keep your feet on the ground at 28? How do you understand community standards? What do you do to make sure you actually are in step with the community? Because presumably you're going to have a long political career. So how do you maintain contact with the community? What are you going to do to achieve that?
Well, I'll be here, Peter, as long as Victorian voters and Victorian Liberal Party members think I should be, and as long as they think I make an impact. I actually think in politics the most important thing is to be grounded in a set of values and a set of philosophies that you really sincerely, deeply believe in, and that are a compass and a guide for you throughout your career. That's something that I've arrived in this place with already. I have a very strong worldview and a philosophy. I call myself a classical liberal. I believe in small government and individual freedom, and I set out in my maiden speech some of the real totemic issues that I will fight on, like freedom of speech and intergenerational equity from the point of view of debt. That's what I hope will be my guide, and will ensure that I stick to the purpose that I came here for. But if ever I lose sight of that, I know I'll have my former colleagues at the IPA to haul me into line, and of course Victorian Liberal Party members who, at the end of the day, hold the power over my future career and my pre-selection.
If they're anything like Peter Reith, they're going to be an absolute pain in the neck. I don't know how you're going to put up with it, frankly.
Yeah, so what about what happened yesterday at the RBA? What's your sort of more general view too in terms of where the economy is going? Because I think, you know, for some people it's a bit of a worry, and I think the government's right to be positive, because there are a lot of positive things to be said about Australia's economy, and let's face it, we're doing a hell of a lot better than just about anybody else. So we're not doing too bad at 3.1%, I think is the latest number, but at the same time, diving down to 1.75 on the rates is certainly something none of us have experienced before. Where do you think that's going to go? Do you have a feel for it?
Well, I think you're right, Peter. I think there are a lot of reasons for optimism. In the last year, the Australian economy created 300,000 net new jobs. That's an extraordinary figure and a really positive figure, and I think Australians can take a lot of heart from that. We are in a really enviable world positioned by world standards, which is 26 years of unbroken economic growth. We are now the second longest period of unbroken economic growth in modern history, and we're only behind Norway, and I think they tapped out at 27. So we're coming really close to that record. So there's a lot of things to be positive about. I think this budget provides us with some more things to be positive about. The 10-year enterprise business tax plan is a really positive thing. It will give businesses the incentive to invest and to grow and to create jobs. And I think that's a real positive for our economy. And I think the Australian people and consumers can take a lot of encouragement and faith from that.
Yeah.
James, I'm sorry.
One question. I appreciate the government's position on workplace relations today, and that will be their position basically going into the election. They're focusing on the ABCC, but do you see a need for workplace reform further down the track if the government is re-elected? And would you be expecting to be involved in that?
Well, I think the government's got a really good starting agenda in the workplace relations debate. They've got critical bills to restore the rule of law in the construction industry with the Australian Building and Construction Commission, and to protect union members from rogue union officials in the Registered Organisations Commission. And that's a really important part of the IR space, and it's probably the first thing that you would do and should do. I think over time Australia will have to confront some of the re-regulation of the labour market that Julie Gillard and Kevin Rudd put in place during their government. They really did turn the clock back in industrial relations sense to the 20th century, and we need a 21st century industrial relations system which is flexible and which allows people to, businesses particularly, to take on workers and grow and take risks. So I think this is an issue that we'll have to confront. It's definitely an issue we're going to have to confront if we ever do come into any economic headwinds or downturns. The kind of system we have now might be fit for purpose when things are going relatively well as they are and we're in a relatively strong position. But if ever the global economy or the Australian economy takes a significant downturn, I think it will really expose the flaws of the system.
Well, I'll tell you what, if Labor gets in, Bill Shorten, he says that he's going to run the country like a union boss. And I'm afraid...
I knew you would raise that.
Well, I mean, about time it got raised. I mean, for heaven's sakes. I mean, the guy can't even see that if you're going to be the Prime Minister of this country...
I'm trying to get him to say one thing nice about Bill Shorten before the election, James. I'm getting nowhere near it. I'm getting nowhere near it. You're getting worse.
I've got 2 months. I mean, there's a real chance I'll think of something.
James, can I ask you something quickly, because we're running out of time? I was interested in your position in relation to not supporting a national curriculum for education. Now, only because I thought one of the good things about Australia was that we would make sure that there were reasonably high standards. I saw what you said about American charter schools, and I spent 7 years in the US, part of that in the university sector. And there is a lot of variation in the American education system. It's got the best and the worst in the world. So I was just curious about why would you not support a national curriculum on education? I'm not being combative, I'm just curious about your view.
Of course. Well, I don't think that one size fits all. Not every school, not every student, not every state, not every community is the same. Not every parent has the same hopes and expectations for their children. And they all have different skills and experience and potential that will be taken advantage of in different ways. So previously we had a range of different state systems. Some were better than others. But I think it's really foolish to believe that if we nationalise a system, that we're automatically going to get the best system nationalised and not the worst system nationalised. So one state might have regarded itself as having a really innovative education system for themselves, but it might not work as well for others. And the risk is that you bring everyone down to the lowest common denominator rather than raising them all up to the highest common denominator. So that's one of my concerns, and that's a general concern about the principle of federalism and competitive federalism. But also with this particular national curriculum, I do also feel that it is biased and it has a progressive bent, and that it doesn't adequately teach our history and our culture in a way that it should, and doesn't promote the good things about our society.
We've got 1 minute left. One final thing in your maiden speech, and we were talking about this. You wanted to see the Australian Embassy move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Why is that?
Well, I think every country should be able to choose their own capital city. Israel says, and it is in effect Jerusalem, not Tel Aviv, but we choose to put our embassy in Tel Aviv as a bit of a statement about the unresolved peace process. But in practical terms, Israel controls Jerusalem. Its major centres of government, including the Knesset, its parliament, is in Jerusalem, and I think it would be an important and symbol for us to demonstrate our support for Israel and its security by moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Well, so, James, sorry.
Well, I was just going to ask you, I mean, when is the Prime Minister going to call the election? Will it be Friday, Saturday or Sunday? And if you
What's
don't
your
know,
guess?
could you find out and let us know? Because we'd like to be the ones to announce it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's your pick of those 3 days, James?
I honestly, I have no idea. That is well above my pay grade. I'm a humble backbencher and I'll be waiting just like you.
You'll go. You'll go far. You'll go far.
You will, to a humble backbencher. That's what I'd like to see, a humble backbencher. You and I were humble once, but I don't remember when. James, can I thank you very much for your time? And as I said, we had 2 of the rising stars of the future on, you and one from the Labor Party. So all the best for the future. Okay.
Pleasure.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being with us. We will see you next week at 8 o'clock. Have a great night.
This can provide endless possibilities. It can create light and jobs, delivering $6 billion in wages for Australians. It produces steel and powers our homes, as well as our economy, injecting $40 billion each year, and it can now reduce its emissions by up to 40%. It's coal, isn't it?